our first Black Mental Health Day event featuring Asante Haughton, mental health speaker and advocate. My name is Diane Mullane, and I'm the mental health leader with the school board and one of your hosts for this evening. We want to let you know at the outset that we will be recording this event and posting it on the board website for future viewing. We'll send out the link via Eventbrite once it's been posted. Just a little bit of housekeeping or Zoom etiquette before we get started. All participants have been muted for the duration of the event to allow everyone to have the best listening experience. We ask that you use the chat box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen, for posting questions. I'm not sure what you're seeing on your screen right now, but if you change your view to speaker view, you'll only be able to see the person talking as well as all of the slides. Okay, so I've already introduced myself, but there actually will be 4 of us who are your co-hosts for this evening. And you'll meet Margaret, Lara, and Yulan in that order over the next 75 minutes. Just a brief overview of the evening. So after our introductory activities, we're very excited to share some student talent featuring students from St. Mary and Notre Dame Catholic Secondary Schools. We'll also share some information on mental health resources and supports. And of course, you'll hear from our keynote speaker. After Asante's talk, we'll have time for a brief question and answer period, so feel free to put questions in the chat box. Note that due to some time restrictions and just trying to keep within the hour and 15 minutes that we've allotted, we likely won't be able to answer all of your questions, and we'd appreciate it if you could keep the questions focused on Asante's talk. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this land has been inhabited by Indigenous people from the beginning. In particular, we here in the Durham region respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island. Our prayer this evening was written by St. Mary's chaplain, Tommy Valacoran, and is being recited by a grade 12 St. Mary's student, Faven Antoinette.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Loving God, compassionate healer, with grateful hearts, we acknowledge your promptings to make us more aware of the trauma your Black children live with because of anti-Black racism, either personal, social, and institutional, which exists in our society today. Help us to find creative ways to bring healing and an end to racism. As our faith tells us ever so often, all are created in your image and likeness. So we dream of a world where no person is subservient to the other, a world where there is equal rights and justice for all people. We dream of a world where there will be no scorn, ridicule, or oppression because of color, sexual orientation, appearance, belief, persuasion, or social standing. A world where your blessed love will be experienced by each human being, where your peace will flourish. We humbly ask you to envelop our guest speaker, Asante Haughton, with your Holy Spirit, as he shares his experiences about the stigma associated with mental illness in the Black community and the intersections between anti-Black racism and mental health. Let this event inspire all of us to work together to build your kingdom as commanded by Jesus, where everyone is valued and loved, as you value and love all of us. We ask this through Jesus, your Son, and our Savior, who incarnated as a colored person to teach us your ways. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Okay, and now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Margaret Bringpom, Senior Manager for Equity, Anti-Racism, and Engagement.
Thank you, Diane. So, why the need for a Black Mental Health Day? To answer this question, we have to look at anti-Black racism itself, which is essentially the inequitable treatment and unequal outcomes for Black Canadians across all sectors, including the education, justice, employment, housing, and child welfare sectors. Racial inequalities, anti-Black racism, discrimination, and the lasting effects of trauma have negative impacts on the mental health and physical well-being of Black Canadians. The lack of concrete action to address anti-Black racism in public services like healthcare and education, and in the area of housing, services only increases the toll of anti-Black racism on Black Ontarians' mental health, regardless of income, education, or employment status. Mental health issues have been found to increase both the risk of physical illness and harm from physical illnesses that Black communities already experience at higher rates. There is a need to deliver mental health services, but even more so, more specifically, culturally relevant and culturally appropriate services using anti-oppression frameworks that recognize the long-standing and enduring impact of anti-Black racism on Black Ontarians and Black Canadians. By proclaiming the first Monday in March in each year as Black Mental Health Day in Ontario, under Bill 178 of the 2017 Anti-Racism Act, the provincial government can publicly and structurally recognize the ongoing impact on mental health that results from anti-Black racism. Black Mental Health Day does not posit Black mental health above the mental health of other groups, nor is the intention to out or to further stigmatize Black communities. Rather, it provides increased awareness of and attention to the specific mental health needs of Black communities across Ontario. We at the Durham Catholic District School Board are also committed to supporting and working with staff, students, and valued stakeholders to illuminate this very important issue area. It's our pleasure to bring to you two back-to-back student performances featuring two Notre Dame students submitted by their drama teacher, Catherine Wilson. These performances were written and performed by the students. So at this time, I just want to note that both performances explicitly reference aspects of some of the high-profile areas of anti-Black racism over the past year. If you are present with younger children, if you feel that it will be intense for you, too intense, or feel that it's just not something that you want to view at this time, please feel free to take a break for 6 minutes. We do want to reiterate at this time that this is the artistic expression of youth who, through their lens, tell us of the social and psychological impacts of racism, violence, marginalization, and stigmatization. And at the DCDSB, we support them in their important work and stand in solidarity with them.
Hi everyone, my name is Naya Grace Young, and I am a grade 9 student at Notre Dame High School. I would like to thank you all so much for attending this evening and for recognizing the importance of student voice. I hope that my spoken word performance provides insight on some of the challenges that Black individuals face today. Thank you, and be well.
We try and live in the moment and enjoy life, but next thing you know, it's the end of the fight. You may not think this is a big deal, but imagine you were George Floyd and had a cop kneel down on your neck to the point you could not breathe, simply for forging a paycheck? Oh, please. Imagine you were a little girl like me and went to the store to find a nice Barbie, but on the shelves all you see are white dolls with long straight hair and colored eyes that don't look like me. Why was it in every movie that the white were the rich and the Black were treated unfairly? They wouldn't get paid the same financially or get the same opportunities because of the color of their skin, but we treat everyone equally. Why do people love to ask to touch my hair? Is it different? Because they love to stop and stare. They say my hair looks like a bird's nest and my curls look like noodles. But was I really seeking their approval? You know Trayvon Martin was just walking down the street with a bag of Skittles, eating them peacefully. But when a man followed him down that street, just remember, Trayvon was only 17. That man thought he was a threat, so therefore shot him. And then he was dead. Now how stupid is that? Because he was wearing a hood and was black, George Zimmerman decided to take away the 17-year-old's life and end it like that. Now you might be tired of hearing me talk, but imagine how we feel living through this all. Why is there so much hatred towards a skin color when we were all created by God our Father? Living in this world as a black individual is like walking on a tightrope. One wrong move and your life is at risk, but you'll never know what happens next. After George Floyd's death, the Black Lives Matter movement was treated like a trend. But I am here to tell you that this is not the end. We will continue to fight until we get our rights. Sometimes I don't understand, because why people love to be such fans of black culture, music, and much more, but they still see us as different and poor. Everyone is beautiful, no matter what shade. Let's not belittle or degrade someone just because the color of their skin, because if we stand together, we all win.
Hello, parents and staff of DCDSB. My name is Victoria Nicholas, and like Nara Grace, I'm too a grade 9 drama student at Notre Dame High School. It is a pleasure to have this opportunity to share my spoken word performance with you, which includes some American Sign Language and mime. Thank you for watching. My name is Victoria, Victoria. Equality. We cannot all succeed when half of us are being held back. Malala. Equality is a human right, not a choice. So why do we have this division between us? Black mamas are crying as their boys are being shot up by police, who are playing a he held, he looked kind of game. It's frustrating. It's the same story, but a different name. All we want is to be equal. Is that too much to ask? Husbands and wives are risking everything just to give the families a pinch of opportunity. But instead, they're locked up in cages like animals. It has to stop. How are we going to call each other a united nation when half of us are not even equal? We must come together and beat the disease called inequality. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, I have a dream that one day this nation will rise. But when will that day be?
Thank you so much, Naya and Victoria, for these really impactful and passionate pieces. At this time, I would like to introduce Lara, who is part of a team of passionate and dedicated social workers here at the school board.
Thank you, Margaret, and special thank you to Naya Grace and Victoria Nicholas. This is a very, very important topic, and it's also a very sensitive topic. And one of the things that has been highlighted, has been helpful, is for people to be able to reach out to several services that could be helpful. So we acknowledge that this can be a difficult topic, and some of it might hit close to home. We've all seen various information on the news, and this could be particularly sensitive. We encourage you to be gentle with yourself as we have this very important and yet sometimes difficult conversation about mental health and anti-Black racism. If anyone feels triggered by the content of the talk, we do encourage you to reach out to your informal support. So your friends, your family, maybe your community network. And also on the screen, we're showing and we're highlighting some mental health support resources. These are particularly important because they provide culturally sensitive, culturally aware, and like Margaret said earlier on, and from an anti-racist and anti-oppressive lens of service. Because of COVID, a lot of services are now available online, which is good because there's some advantages to that you don't have to commute. And all the services that are listed here, whether it's the Black Youth Health Line, you can reach them by phone, whether it's Taibu Community Health Center. And I want to emphasize Taibu because they're one of the chief advocates for the Black Mental Health Day. You can reach out by phone. You can book virtual appointments. The Women's Multicultural Resource Counseling Center of Durham also has fantastic programs for youth, for families, covers range of employment support as well. Also, we have Tropicana Community Services. As I mentioned earlier on, all the services do provide culturally relevant support to our Black, Caribbean, Canadian, and African community members. As well as we also have general support, so some more general support that you might be familiar with, whether it's the Kids Helpline, the Wellness Together Canada program that has a portal, and you can register online for either doing virtual or even doing programs. We've got the Crisis Services of Canada. We've got our local distress center in Durham, as well as the Durham Regional Crisis Response. We also do emphasize that if the situation is of immediate concern and safety is at stake, please call 911 or visit your local emergency department. At our school board level, we do offer social work support. Like Margaret said, I am one of the school social workers at DCDSB, and we have an access line that you can reach. It is not a crisis line. It is a line where you can leave a message and one of our mental health professionals will call you back and provide support. We directly in the school system, we also help bridge families with services that are in the community. So now I would like to introduce you to our keynote speaker. One thing that comes to mind when I think about Mr. Asante Haughton is that he is so relatable, right? That was the first word that came to mind after listening to him. And he is quite humble, but I think it's also important to highlight a lot of the great work that he's doing in the community. He is emerging as a leader in mental health. He's a veteran speaker. Asante has presented across the globe, including having a pair of TED Talks that you might want to check out later. That was my first introduction to him. And he details the impact of family trauma on mental health. Through his work, he's also been named a CAMH 150 difference maker. And he has been awarded the distinction of being one of the top 150 makers in Canadian mental health. That is significant. Since 2019, as the host of Cypher, a web show that takes caregiving stories and turns them into songs, Asante has been interviewing loved ones, supporting their families to highlight the healing power of connection. That was the second thing that stood out to me when he talked. He talked about the power of connection, especially in our informal setting. In addition, Asante has rediscovered his love of writing, becoming a contributing editor to Inspire magazine, a wellness resource for youth. Most recently, Asante has co-founded the Reach Out Response Network, an advocacy organization currently working with the City of Toronto to usher in transformative crisis response reform. Now, having family entrenched themselves in the mental health space at large, Asante is now devoting his time and energy and focus to the intersections of race and mental health. This is why he's here tonight. He seeks to amplify the myriad of experience of Blackness across the diaspora in order to shed light on the ways in which being Black in a world that seeks to diminish Blackness impacts the mental health of Black people. Asante believes in confronting current and historical truths about our world and the human condition. However uncomfortable those truths may be, in order to move towards healing. When not trying to save the world, Asante has found laughing at his own jokes, Netflixing and checking his fantasy football stats, watching cartoon. And the next one is something that I think a lot of us share with you, Asante, being frustrated with Toronto sports teams. And true, Asante can be pretty laid back. He is very vocal about his advocacy and drive for change as he aims to deliver a message of social awareness, social justice, community betterness, and above all, hope. So I am one that believes that stories are important. They are powerful, they're transformatory. And at the same time, Asante, I'm mindful that stories come at a price. With gratitude, we want to welcome you and thank you for sharing your story with us, because you do not owe us those stories. And sharing that story has an impact, a price that you are paying. And even though we derive the benefit of learning from it. So I thank you very much for the privilege of joining us tonight and for sharing your truth and your experience as you highlight the challenges and also instill hope. I would like everybody to join me in welcoming Asante Haughton tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wow, what an introduction. I really appreciate everyone being here this evening. Thank you for making the time, taking the time. Hopefully we have a good time together. So I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to share with you a poem. I'm going to talk a little bit, about, I guess, race and mental health while interspersing some aspects of my personal story. And then finally, at the end, there's going to be space left over to do a little Q&A, because I think that me talking at you is, maybe it's nice, I don't know. But I think also that what's really effective is dialogue. And I'm a big believer that solving problems happens through dialogue as we share our experiences and our worldviews and try to find common ground. So with all that being said, I'm going to get started with a poem, and this poem is called Dear Miss Teacher. Dear Miss Teacher, you said that I was bad and you were glad whenever I didn't show up, picking the phone up and making mine blow up, trying to tell my mama things she don't need to hear, things she don't want to hear. For you, what I do and don't do is clear. Homework or no work, telling me your lies like I believe in you, not realizing I can see the lies behind your eyes. I ain't nothing to you but the stuff under your shoe. You don't say it with your words, but you say it with what you do. It's never hi, hello, how's it going, or what's up? Because in your eyes I messed up, you stuck up. Teacher, I'd rather mess up than suck up my pride to suck up to you with your rules and $200 shoes and your why don't you try, you have nothing to lose. As if you could understand it's hard to choose success when the weight on your chest makes it hard for you to take a breath to even start singing the blues. So when my face is screwed up and I'm disobeying the rules, what I'm really trying to say is I wish that you would ask me what's wrong instead of what's wrong with you. And then you feed me lies like you can do anything you choose. Come on, baby. We both know that ain't true. Like I can't eat every day. I can't sleep every day. I can't avoid the streets every day. The blood stains on the concrete every day. Harassment from police every day. I can't avoid the taunts from the dreams I can't reach every day. So forget what you preach every day when you have no idea what it's like to be me every day. How dare you tell me it can get better when you don't make time to listen to my stories of no coat in stormy weather? And now you want me to show up for you when you haven't shown up for me? Another administrator administering pressure when what I need is to breathe because the gun smoke is too much. Haven't had a good meal in 2 months. Nothing good to feel in 2 months. So sad that nothing has felt real in 2 months. But for real, what I need is for you to listen, not to hold me down. Unless you're ready to hold me down, listen and get to know me now. Stop trying to judge me. Don't make me into a thug B. Leave, I can escape the madness of the prostitution and drugs. See, it's hard to move forward in a world that don't trust me, in a world that just wants to kick, scratch, and punch me. I've been through so much, Miss Teacher, so don't hurt me, just hug me. Because the truth of it all is, I just need somebody to love me. Thank you, everybody. So that one is called Dear Miss Teacher, and I wrote that many years ago. And as I just went through it now, I realized just how pertinent it is to current events and things that have been happening. But I did write this maybe actually about 5 years ago, and I wrote it because um, I was at that time working a job in the school system, or not directly in the school system, but supporting high school kids from what we might call bad neighborhoods move through the school system. And I kept seeing a lot of very common things that made me think about my childhood and growing up, and what it was like for me and my classmates and my friends and the folks who I played basketball with and all of those things. And what I saw often was that we were prematurely judged for the way that we showed up in school, whether that showing up meant talking back to the teacher, or doing things that were overtly considered disrespectful, but also the other ways we showed up when we were criticized for not smiling enough, or we were criticized for the way that we dressed, or the way that we walked, or every part of our being, really. And there was always, not always, but most of the time, the first, I'm not sure I would call it instinct, but the first way in which we were perceived was through a lens of what's wrong with these kids, rather than what's happening in these kids' lives that might make them show up the way that they're showing up. And by and large, we were all Black kids, so it definitely had an impact. So for me, I wrote this poem to really highlight how much might be happening in someone's life that might be impacting the way that they show up, whether we're talking about school or we're talking about something else. What is happening in the totality of someone's experiences is really, really important. And when you're a Black person, oftentimes the totality of your experience is not given attention. Rather, your experience is seen through the eyes of stereotypes that then interpret what is being seen and presented as an image that does not reflect what that person is truly going through and experiencing, and maybe the support that they might need. Watching the two performances earlier from the young people, who are quite amazing, by the way. I wish I was that talented at that age. One thing that the first performance said, it talked about, was the feeling of never seeing yourself represented anywhere in life, and the impact that has on you. The person, the young woman was talking about Barbie dolls and seeing Barbie dolls with blonde hair. I remember growing up and always struggling with what I could be for Halloween, because all the superheroes were white and I couldn't find a costume or someone to dress up as that looked like me. So I often chose to dress up as anything where you could put a mask on, because those were the only costumes that really, I found that could fit. So that was just, that's just one example. And I'm going actually a little bit off topic in terms of the direction I wanted to go in. But before I get into any of what I want to talk about tonight, I think the first thing I want to do is to say that when we talk about mental health for Black folks, we cannot talk about mental health for Black folks without also talking about racism, because those two things go hand in hand. Racism broadly has huge impacts on who we are and how we live our lives, exemplified maybe by the poem I just read, but also by the performances from the young people that you saw earlier. Excuse me. There's actually a lot of there are actually a lot of studies that talk about the impact of racism, and that racism in a lot of ways can show up or produce outcomes that look a lot like post-traumatic stress disorder. So I'm going to read a couple paragraphs to you from empirical studies that talk about just this. So the first one is racial trauma or race-based traumatic stress refers to the mental and emotional injury caused by encounters with racial bias and ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes. Any individual that has experienced an emotionally painful, sudden, and uncontrollable racist encounter is at risk of suffering from a race-based traumatic stress injury. In some individuals, prolonged incidents of racism can lead to symptoms like those experienced with post-traumatic stress disorder. This can look like depression, anger, recurring thoughts of the event, physical reactions, headaches, chest pain, insomnia, hypervigilance, low self-esteem, and mentally distancing from the traumatic event. So going back to my poem, depression, anger, recurring thoughts of the event, physical reactions, headaches, chest pains, insomnia. How many students are showing up and they seem disengaged and they seem withdrawn? How many students are showing up late? Why are they late? How many students are showing up and being, presenting as angry? Imagine that maybe it's not the problem of the student, but the world that the student is living in and the world that they are experiencing. So racism tends to impact people in a variety of ways. One of them being undereducation, which then, and let me dive a little bit deep into it. So when I say undereducation, what that means is maybe you did not achieve the level of education that you otherwise might have achieved had circumstances been better or had certain barriers not existed, barriers that might be caused by racism, right? Let's think, the one thing that happened to me a lot growing up was the first week of class, I would show up and I was always a pretty eager student. I, had my hand up all the time. I wanted to get the questions right. I sort of wanted to show off in class. But the first week of class, I put my hand up and the teachers wouldn't call on me. It was almost like I wasn't there, like I didn't exist, right? Until I handed in that first assignment, and usually I did really well on that assignment, and then all of a sudden I started to get attention. But what if I wasn't someone who had a mother that taught him to read when he was 3 years old, so developed a thirst for knowledge? What if I didn't have that privilege? What if instead I was someone who was not a high achieving student and didn't prove my credibility as a student to the institution every single time I moved through it? What if instead I was ignored? Maybe I would not have been pushed forward the way that I personally was by a lot of the faculty members I encountered, because they saw something in me that maybe they didn't see in others that looked like me, because those others maybe didn't have the same kind of mom who I did, who pushed me forward heavily into education. What if those other kids fell through the cracks because of that? You see, this is one of the ways in which undereducation shows up. And undereducation over time accumulates. And this is something I used to see all the time in my old work working with young folks. I used to see so many, I'd look into OSRs, Ontario Student Records, and I would see so many Black boys being streamed into special education, or be at a high school level being streamed into locally developed, or being suspended. And I was seeing the difference in the kinds of the length of suspensions. A 1-day suspension versus a month suspension for the same thing. I was seeing these differences all the time. So you're taking away opportunities for young people to be educated and also to feel safe within a system. As you move forward through life, this can lead to fewer professional opportunities. And if you have fewer professional opportunities, that can lead to lower socioeconomic status, less income, more poverty. And with low poverty, with poverty, what happens is, poorer nutrition, which can lead to worse health outcomes, which can lead to social isolation, or social isolation could be one of the impacts of having fewer opportunities. And all of these things lead to stress. And I think we all can agree that, or we all know to some extent, that stress is one of the biggest contributors to mental health challenges or health challenges in general. Stress is one of the biggest killers of human beings out there, physically, but also one of the biggest indicators of having poor mental health and developing a mental illness. So if this racism is starting at a young age for a lot of people, what we are doing is putting them on a path to having an increased likelihood of experiencing stress, and thus an increased likelihood of experiencing mental health challenges. Now, we might think, okay, racism is bad, but what do we really, how do we really define racism? What is racism? What does it look like? And that makes me think about something that my brother once said to me. My brother once said to me that racism is very hard to define and prove, but it's really easy to feel. And that really resonated with me because I think that when we think of racism, sometimes what we're thinking about is, oh, someone called you the N-word, or someone, beat you up because of the color of your skin. And, those are obviously horrible, horrible things. And those things do happen. Those things have happened to members of my family. However, I also think about all the other ways in which racism shows up. I was just talking about a few there, as barriers to opportunity. I also think about, the isolation that can arise as a result of racism. If you are constantly in a position of feeling like the world does not want you and is pushing you away, how does one continue to try to engage in that world? We talk about things like stereotypes and microaggressions. A stereotype, I think we all know what that is, but a microaggression is something that is, a small behavior or action or even physical reaction to someone or something that we don't realize is offensive and harmful, but it might be. For instance, it might be something as simple as, this is something I used to get a lot. I'm a very, a very tall person, and people would always ask me, do you play basketball? Or even another thing that was really interesting that would happen to me is I would show up at a basketball court where, maybe it was not in my neighborhood, and a lot of the folks there were not black people, and I would show up and I'm the tall black guy and I walk onto the court, and all of a sudden everybody wants to be on my team, or they're afraid of my perceived ability, and they don't know anything about me. Maybe I suck. I mean, I didn't suck, but maybe I did, right? So, but these are just assumptions being made about your personhood that it might seem like a positive thing, but it's also narrowing you down to something very small and stereotypical. Did they know that I was an artist? Did they know that I was a great writer? Did they know that I was, really into, books and, some like more nerdier pursuits? Did they know these things, right? Those assumptions were never made about me, right? And even when those things showed up, they were not the focus of my personhood and my life. And so, these things definitely do have an impact. And, I remember I'll share some examples from my personal life growing up dealing with racism. I would say that the first time I ever felt racism, even though I didn't know what it was in daycare at 4 years old, showing up to daycare, and, you try to make friends and you want to play with other kids, and realizing early that there were some kids who played with me and some kids who didn't. And there was a pattern to who played with me and who didn't. The kids who played with me, by and large, were kids who were Black or Asian or South Asian or, people of color. The kids who didn't play with me were almost always the white kids. And in fact, they didn't play with anybody else that was not white. And at 4 years old, I thought this was really weird. And I also felt the rejection, because, you know, me and the other kids, we were in the small minority. And, you know, even during picture day, we would end up at the back of the picture. And, you know, they wouldn't take the picture unless the other kids, they made sure the other kids were in the picture. But for folks like me and others, I mean, sometimes you couldn't even see our faces or our heads in the picture. You know, so little things like that I was noticing from a young age. 7 years old, I come home and I'm walking into my building and I see there's glass smashed in the lobby. And then I go up the elevator, and from the elevator to my doorway is a trail of blood. And I go inside and I see my two older brothers, who were teenagers at the time, nursing injuries and nursing wounds. What happened? They had just got jumped and beaten up by, you know, a big group, 8, 9, 10 white kids, white supremacist kids in the building that we lived in. So this is something that we couldn't really escape, because we lived in the same building as our tormentors. So, you know, there's so many different ways in which these things show up. The amount of times I've been stopped by police growing up, despite the fact that I was a kid who essentially got straight A's, you know, most of his life, and never got suspended, never got arrested, never really got in trouble. But I was being stopped by police all the time, you know, walking to and from school, because I didn't really go, you know, that many places at that age, right? So, and the impact that has on you, these are the people who are supposed to be your last line of defense in society. So when something goes bad and things are going wrong, who do you call? You call police, and, you know, you trust that they're going to figure it out. But what if you can't do that? You don't have that last line of defense. So then what do you have? Do you feel included in society? Imagine the impact that has on you. Think about us as human beings. What do we do when we want to punish somebody? We ostracize them from a social group, a family, a community. We send them to prison. Even in prison, we send them to solitary confinement. We exile them. What we do is we isolate them. And we isolate them because we know that isolation is going to hurt, and it's going to have an impact that is negative on that person. It's a form of punishment. Now imagine walking through a society feeling that isolated all of the time, but still being expected to succeed within that structure. What does that do to your mental health? Imagine you are pushing a boulder up a hill, a boulder so big that you couldn't see around it, that you couldn't see over it, but somehow you found the strength and the willpower to push it up the hill. And then when you got to the top of the hill, someone that you couldn't see kept pushing you down it. And no matter what, you just couldn't make it to the top of the hill. How do you find hope? Imagine, and this is an analogy I like to use to describe, you know, the feeling of racism as well as the one I just used. Imagine that you lived in an abusive household, and I'm very sorry for anyone who that might be your experience. It might have been your experience. Coming home every day, you know, you may not be experiencing abuse all of the time. You may not be experiencing abuse most of the time. Out of 365 days a year, 360 days might be free of the abuse. But for those 5 days that the abuse is present, it makes the rest of your 360 days terrible, miserable, unlivable, scary, anxiety-filled. Now, as a Black person experiencing racism, the world outside of your doors feels like that abusive household. You don't know when you're going to experience racism. When is it going to show up at your doorstep? When is it going to hurt you? It could be any day, every single time you walk outside of your house. So you're always stressed out. You're always filled with anxiety. You're always watching. You're always looking over your shoulder. What is that person on the street? You know, are they looking at me in a way where they think I'm a threat? Will they respond to their feelings by accusing me of something I didn't do, or escalating a situation that didn't need to be escalated, or who knows what might happen, right? So there's that anxiety you're living with all of the time. Now, let me, you know, flip it a little bit in a different way. Imagine you were at a party and everyone was being really nice to you, and your friends introduced you as, you know, the life of the party. Oh, this guy is great. This person is great, and you know, you keep introducing yourself by your name, but no one is calling you the name that you introduce yourself by. They call you a different name. They're mispronouncing your name. Nobody is getting it. Oh, but they think you're so much fun, you know, because you can dance and you can sing, and you know, you're charismatic. They think you're so fun, but they don't take the time to learn your name. They don't take the time to learn anything else about you, but they want you to dance and sing. They don't see you. So I use these examples to illustrate that one of the biggest challenges with regard to, you know, mental health for Black folks is the experience of racism. And that experience could be negative things like, you know, getting beat up. That experience could be things like glass ceilings, trying really, really hard, but never getting the opportunities that you feel you deserve. That experience could be not knowing what day or when you are going to run into some racism that hurts you psychologically or maybe physically or emotionally. That, you know, it could be feeling like folks are seeing certain parts of you, but not the entirety of you. So you don't actually really exist to them as a real person. So these are just a few of the ways in which racism shows up in our lives all of the time. And the impact of feeling isolated or dehumanized or not seen or actually being harmed definitely has an impact on your mental health. And what do we do about all this? Well, you know, I think when we talk about support for mental health with Black folks, there is a lot of talk about stigma. And, you know, there's talk that, oh, Black people don't want to talk about mental health, or, you know, people who are religious, you know, regardless of religion, they don't want to talk about mental health. And, you know, I think, you know, there is such a focus on stigma that it doesn't talk about what I think are some other issues that prevent Black folks from being able to get mental health supports. Things like the actual cost of mental health support. It's very expensive. Talk therapy is very expensive if you're paying for it. If you're not paying for it, you'll be waiting a year and a half, 2 years before you can find a therapist. If you're paying for it, you might wait 2 weeks, you might wait a month, but you're also paying $150 an hour, $200 an hour to access it. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, one of those reasons including racism, most Black folks just cannot afford that. And then there is the issue of trust, trust in systems. You know, if you're a Black person, you're growing up in this world where you've learned to distrust many systems because of the way that you've been treated in the past. You know, whether we're talking about the justice system, whether we're talking about the education system, whether we're talking about, you know, maybe a social worker who doesn't treat you well, maybe we're talking about healthcare. Medical racism is a thing. An example is that most dermatology textbooks up until very recently always used people with lighter skin in the textbooks. Therefore, folks like myself who might have a skin condition may not be diagnosed or might be misdiagnosed. There are also other myths like Black folks have a higher tolerance for pain, and these things exist in actual textbooks. I've seen and heard this from folks who I know who are doctors. You know, so these things exist too. So we develop distrust for these systems. There's also the challenge of, you know, not feeling psychologically or emotionally safe in settings when trying to access help, because our stories are not being seen or heard. We're not being seen or heard as whole people. You know, this is a huge issue. If I, you know, a huge part of talk therapy is what they call the Therapeutic Alliance, the relationship developed between the person delivering the therapy and the person accessing it. Having a strong therapeutic alliance or therapeutic relationship usually means a more positive outcome. But if I don't feel safe walking into that space, how do I develop a strong therapeutic alliance? Why don't I feel safe? because the person across from me may not understand my story. Or I might even describe my story to them, but they may not feel like it's important to my experience because it doesn't resonate for them. So this is why we talk about things like cultural competency. Anyways, I say all of this to say that there are a lot of challenges within the system, and it's important that we acknowledge the different experiences that we all go through so that we can get to a point where we are really seeing each other. Because I think when we see each other, we can start to work on this thing called racism. And that's why I share so many stories, because it's not just about helping folks to see me, it's helping folks to see others who look like me and the things that others who look like me experience and go through in life, so that if someone else who looks like me walks into a doctor's office or a therapy office, that they might be treated better than they otherwise would have been treated if the person across from them didn't know their story or didn't make space for them to tell their story. What I think is really important to acknowledge today is that we might not be having this conversation if it were not for George Floyd's murder. I personally have experienced an explosion in my career over the last several months since May 25th, 2020, when George Floyd died. That explosion has mostly looked like people wanting to speak to me or with me or invite me to places to talk about my story as a person, my story with racism, my experiences with racism, my thoughts, my feelings, all of these pieces. I've been talking about this subject for 15, 20 years of my life, but it's only been the past 8 or 9 or so months where people have cared enough to want to hear what I had to say, and someone had to die for that. So let's all keep that in mind, that folks like me in particular, or folks who look like me, we weren't seen as valuable enough to be included. We weren't seen as valuable enough to have space for our stories. And because we weren't seen, we continued to be heavily impacted by racism, which heavily impacted our mental health. But now we have an opportunity to change that, to make things different. Now we have an opportunity to make the world a better place. And hopefully we can do that together. Thank you. I'm now open for questions.
Thank you, Asante. I know I'll give some people some time to think of some questions for you. I'm sure there are lots. I know that your brother's quote really struck me. Just exactly like you said, that how hard racism is to define, but how easy to feel. And I think with your stories, it really helps us to not only define what racism is, but just understanding the impact of it all, right? And through one person's lens and the stories that you might have, there are millions of others out there. So I want to open up the questions to everyone out there, because I know for me, it was really thought-provoking and very powerful. The first question I have for you is, knowing that there are a lot of educators here with our school board, advice, thoughts on how they can help. I know that even your poem right in the beginning spoke to that a little bit, but just thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. I think that leading with compassion is definitely something that can make a huge difference. I know that, in my talk today, I talked a lot of the negative things I experienced in a variety of systems, including the school system. But one thing I also want to say is that I experienced a lot of positive things in the school system from teachers who did lead with compassion, from teachers who made space to do things like, my grade 10 English teacher essentially throughout the curriculum that she was given, and brought in stories written by and written for a variety of different cultures and people of color. That's, how I discovered authors like, Rohinton Mystery, who's, a great author, an Indian Canadian author, who writes a lot about, things that are essentially very Indian. A whole slew of Black authors that were introduced to me, and probably one of the most important books I ever read in my life, which was the autobiography of Antoine Fisher, Finding Fish, a book that completely changed my life. So, that's another thing that we can do, is really think about, what are we teaching, who is in our classroom, and what are we teaching them? And are we teaching them from a place of diverse representation, or are we teaching them from a place of, Shakespeare and the classics, which only represent a narrow view of, life experiences? So I think that's one thing. And also, again, the compassion piece. I know that I can only imagine how annoying it might be to have kids walk in 15 minutes late every day while you're in the middle of your lesson, or a kid that you haven't seen for 2 weeks walk in and is disruptive, or that kind of thing. Obviously there is some level of managing the classroom that does need to happen, but beyond that, making space to maybe pull that kid aside and try to find out more information about what might be going on in that kid's life. Nobody wants to fail. Nobody wants to do badly at school. In working with young people, all of the kids that did really well had someone to support them, whether it was a parent or a teacher, or sometimes a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a partner, or a community. There's someone there to support them. And the students who didn't do well was because they didn't have support. They didn't have someone that cared about them. Now, for me, an experience that I had was the worst grades of my life were in grade 7 and 8. And I was in a school that was, out of district. I was shipped off to a school where, it was like, oh, you're smart, so we'll send you to this other school where, it's in this almost all white, rich neighborhood, which was, and the school had a reputation for being a school that, fast tracked kids to, great places. But the experience there was terrible for me. And it wasn't because people were walking around calling me the N-word all the time and things like that. It was because they just ignored me. It was like I wasn't there. And they demonstrated that my experience, of life just did not exist to them. And maybe it didn't, but they didn't care to learn about it either. Right? So, I was getting 60s, and then I went to a school, that was considered a bad school in high school, but it was filled with very compassionate teachers. And then I was getting, almost all 90s for the rest of my high school career. So that compassion aspect really, really matters. And making space to, treat a child like there's more going on than what you're seeing.
Definitely. I think that compassion piece couldn't be highlighted anymore. Definitely. And along the same lines, we have a question. We've been talking about educators and how they can support. But the question here that we have is, how do you protect your child's mental health as they navigate a system that is not created with them in mind?
Could you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
So it goes, how do you protect your child's mental health as they navigate a system that is not created with them in mind? So I'm assuming perhaps it's a mental health system, or
any system.
Any system, really. Yeah.
I think, one of the things that was really helpful for me is that my mom spent a lot of time making sure that she let us know that we were worth it, and that our perception of ourselves should not be determined by the perception of others who might treat us badly based on skin color or anything else. Excuse me. One thing that really helped with that was there were in the household, there were just a lot of images of Black strength in the household. So you were just surrounded by it. Black history posters. That's how I learned about so many of our the folks that we still celebrate today. I had these posters all around the house and books. So when I pick up a book, I was reading about things that were strong and important to me, and I could resonate with. My mom gave me the autobiography of Malcolm X to read when I was 13 years old. And then I read it again when I was about 15 years old. And so it was really just stuffing it down my throat that you are worth it, no matter what anybody else might think about you based on skin color. And that if someone is disrespectful or, whatever toward you because of your skin color, that's their problem and not your problem to internalize. So I think those things for me were really helpful, just developing that strong defense system or defense mechanism or whatever you want to call it, force field of just, knowing that there was a lot about me that was worth it, even if others didn't see it. The other piece is that, again, my mom was constantly talking to me about Black history. And then, around age 15 and 16 years old, when I stopped seeing that stuff represented in my textbooks, I went out on my own and I started to seek out that information on my own. Now I had the motivation to do that. Not everyone might have that motivation. So let's provide them with that information, provide them with, the avenues to lead them down that path of self-discovery. Because I think that kind of stuff is really important. If our history is just reduced to slavery and the suffering that comes along with that, I think that can be really challenging and a tough pill to swallow. But there are thousands of years that happened before slavery, and even during and after slavery. There are so many amazing stories and things that Black people have been able to build and succeed in ways in which we've been able to thrive and contribute to the world that may not be in the mainstream, but those things do exist. And it's up to us to teach ourselves what those things are. And I think those things can really act as a barrier to, being impacted, or as a buffer, I should say, to being impacted by, all of the things that we might experience in the world because of racism.
So the questions are flying in like hotcakes.
Yeah, I have so many questions in my private.
And we feel horrible because there's only a limited amount of time. So we'll try to squeeze them in here. But another one we have is, so any advice on how we can encourage racialized students to access help and to speak their truth regarding the racism they experience at school when they may have no authority figures that look like them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And the reason I think that's a great question is because I think we're constantly putting the responsibility on the racialized students and not putting the responsibility on us to create space for them. It's not that they don't want help, it's that they don't feel safe accessing the places where the help resides. So how do we make those spaces feel safer to them? It's not enough for us to open the doors and expect us to walk through them. Instead, we have to open the door, go through the door ourselves, meet them where they're at, make them feel safe, and then walk back through that door with them, which is not easy, but it's necessary. I think one thing that I've been talking about over the past several months is that Black folks, Indigenous folks, other racialized folks have so many reasons to not trust and not many reasons to trust. So we are not obligated, or they're not obligated to be trustful of the system because of what they've already experienced. So it's up to us to rebuild that trust and go that extra mile to create that space where they might feel safe.
Definitely. In terms of, and here, someone's asking a question about taking that extra step and going that extra mile. So are there any key questions or statements that you can recommend I use that would open up a conversation with students I work with about their own story or experience as a white social worker in this situation, but even for a white teacher or a white principal, to just open up that conversation?
Well, I think there are a few things. Again, let's not expect that this process will be fast or easy. um, it just doesn't work that way. I mean, just regularly. I mean, if you go on a date with someone and they start pouring their heart out to you on the first date, I mean, what are the odds that you're going to call back, right? So, I mean, developing that intimacy and that trust, it does take time. But one thing that I find really helpful, or that I have found helpful when I was working with students, and this was something I read in a book, was to stop asking students, "How are you doing?" and to start asking them, "What are you doing?" But in a more compassionate way. So rather than saying, "How was your weekend?" you could say, "What did you do this past weekend?" So that puts the student in a position where they can't say, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm good." All of a sudden, there's an opening for them to tell you a little bit about themselves and what they might have been up to. "Oh yeah, miss, I was chilling with my friends. We went to to the mall and we did this." Right? And then you have an opening to start a conversation, to learn more about that student, and they're gonna hopefully interpret your interest in them as, "Oh, this person cares about me," and then it'll provide for them, uh, maybe a path toward trusting you, and then everything else can follow suit after that.
For sure, for sure. And this one is a question about parents again. So what would you say to those parents who feel that they are in a constant battle with teachers? Not all of them, but with some teachers, as they advocate for their children when dealing with microaggressions. What would you say to those teachers?
The first thing that came to my head was read a book, but no, but being that probably won't be a productive response. Um, I think that's a tough one. I think that we cannot force minds to change by trying to stuff information down someone's throat. I think, well, sometimes that, some people actually do respond, well to information, but some people don't, because they take that as criticism, and, it provokes a sense of, if I admit that I didn't know this, then I'm ashamed of myself and I'm a bad person because I, was doing something that might be considered racist or what have you. And nobody wants to be called racist because, I mean, it's the way I think that we, we look at this thing is, rather than saying that person is acting in a racist way, we say that's a racist person. So it's like we paint the whole person that way, right? Which I think is very challenging for people. So for me, what I really try to do is try to engage in conversations with folks and try to use examples that will be relatable, examples that illustrate the general concept of what you're trying to get across. Analogies maybe that can be relatable. That actually goes a little bit back to what I wanted to say in response to one of your previous questions, which is, finding that relatable connection. I'm, a tall, cisgendered, black male, heterosexual. So I have a particular experience, and maybe I'm interacting with, a white trans person who has a different experience, but we might both have an experience of feeling oppressed or discriminated against, and that might be the thing that uh, has us kind of see eye to eye a little bit, but using that example or looking at that example of or in the question, maybe it's like highlighting to, I think it was a parent, um, what has it felt like for you when you've been mistreated in ways that are unfair, and nobody believed you, that no one believed that that was happening to you, and you kept trying to explain to people that this was the thing that was happening and you were experiencing it, but no one believed you. How did you feel in that moment? So how do you think the child feels? You know, so it's not like, not saying, oh, this is obviously a microaggression or you're being racist. I mean, most people are going to put their walls up. So it's like, how do we access that conversation in a different way, in a way that people might be able to step into it and relate to it and relate it back to themselves and say, oh, I didn't realize that's what I was doing. You know, it doesn't mean I'm a horrible person or I was doing that intentionally. I was doing something I didn't realize might offend or hurt someone else. And because I'm a good person, I want to change that. And so, you know, now I know how to do differently.
For sure. And I think that's definitely a journey for a lot of people to get there. And I can appreciate the difficulty in working through that for sure.
I mean, yeah, it's not easy. I mean, I
no,
said it
totally.
like it was simple, but I mean, it's not going to work a lot of times,
Yes.
you know?
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Asante. I know there's so many questions, but unfortunately we do have to move forward. I know that we could be here all night asking you questions throughout the entire time. But I think we'll move forward with the last little bit of our presentation that we do have here. We're just going to highlight again the mental health resources that we have up here, wanting to make sure that you see these again. And if you are wanting to access some of these resources, feel free to take a screenshot or use your phone and take a picture. The first slide here has the culturally relevant supports. Again, the Black Youth Helpline, Taboo, Women's Multicultural Center. And then the second slide here is just general mental health supports and resources again. And of course, if you're ever in immediate concern, if there's a concern for your safety, you can always call 911. And lastly, again, the social work access line, you can reach out for support from the school board and we can be directed in the right direction. We are going to watch a short little video here. It's another student piece from a student from St. Mary. Her name is Khalees Fairclough, and she's going to be reciting the poem that she has written called The Illness That Nobody Sees.
Where I Am From by Khalees Fairclough, Mental Illness. I am from confusion, from the world feeling too noisy to handle, when in reality it's completely silent. From the constant question I ask myself, why am I so violent? What is wrong with me? I am from stress, the tugging of every single follicle of my hair, and the overwhelming feeling that nobody really cares, but in reality I just wasn't aware that I had loved ones, here, there, and everywhere. I am from depression, mood swings taking over my emotions, shutting everyone out while silently begging for help, from feeling so drained that I became numb, from thinking everything I say, do, and think is dumb. I am from hating the outside image of myself just as much as I hate the inside, from feeling obese and anorexic at the same time, never to be satisfied with the beauty of my whole self. I am from overthinking, the small, large, and medium things, from being called extra for my indecisiveness, when really my mind is going through a crisis. This is tiring to the point where I wonder if it is time to give up. From the feeling of freedom while still feeling unbearably stuck. I am from mental illness, the one sickness that people choose to ignore, that is often only talked about behind closed doors. They say it's fake and not too serious. They act like I'm crazy or even delirious. Just because they can't see it doesn't mean I cannot feel it. Feeling like an outsider looking into my own mind, watching it fall apart until there is no more time. I am from having to work on my own mind while feeling like I'm the very thing destroying it. Though I suffer, I am not alone. There are outlets out there that have knowledge to be known and examples to be shown. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khalees, for sharing that with us. It's just so beautiful, so beautiful. I'm just going to pass it on over to Diane Mullane to wrap up for us tonight.
Where I Am From.
All right, wow, so powerful. Thank you for that, Khalees. So this is just a collage. We put together some art submissions from Notre Dame Catholic Secondary School. And these are all drawings done by recent grads and current grade 12 students. And this was shared by the art teacher at Notre Dame, Diego Nigeri. So we thought we'd put it together in a nice collage. And while you're just taking a minute to look at this, I want to let you know that we'll be sending a survey link after the event so that you have a chance to give us some feedback. And we hope you'll just take a few minutes to fill it out so that we know how we might improve on for future events, and that'll come through Eventbrite. And finally, we have another young student, Damiola Salaja, a student from St. Mary's, who sent in this beautiful drawing along with a description that we'd like to read out loud. So in Damiola's words, when it comes to mental health, 1 minute I feel fine, and then suddenly I find myself feeling down and lonely. It took me some time to be able to find what I could fall back on to pick me up again, which is where my artwork comes in. Art for me is like an escape into a peaceful, happy, and problem-free world. The peace I get from this then allows me to understand my emotions with a clear mind, which is why I wanted to present my portrait of actress Yara Shahidi. This piece was one of the hardest I've ever done, and I was in a confusing place when I made it, so seeing it come to life was a great relief for me. So when I read this, I think that this is a great reminder for all of us that we all have mental health, and that on our own mental health journeys, we need to look for the things that bring us joy and that help us get through those difficult moments, whether that be art, music, or other forms of expression, mindfulness, physical activity, adequate sleep and nutrition, taking time alone to wind down, or spending time with loved ones to rejuvenate. And when those things help but may not be enough, there should be no shame or stigma in reaching out for help. And so as we wrap up this event, I'd like to formally thank our keynote speaker, Asante Haughton. Asante, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your wisdom, your knowledge of all the ways that race and racism impact how we think about and access mental health, and for shedding some light on this important topic in such a way as to promote conversations and, more importantly, actions from non-Black allies. I'd also like to say a huge thank you and a round of applause, if we had our audio on, to all of the students, so Faven, Khalees, Damilola from St. Mary's, Naya Grace and Victoria from Notre Dame, as well as the grade 12 student artists who sent in their submissions, and of course their teachers who supported and encouraged them. And to my committee, who did a fantastic job moderating the event this evening, and to all of you for making time to come out for this important conversation. I thank you all. Good night.